What if everything you've been told about Venezuela is incomplete? What if this story isn't really about socialism versus capitalism, democracy versus dictatorship, or even human rights, at least not at its core? Here's the mystery. Venezuela's economy collapsed, its oil industry imploded, and its government became internationally isolated. On paper, Venezuela should be geopolitically irrelevant by now. And yet, the United States still can't let it go. Sanctions remain. Diplomacy keeps reopening. Back-channel negotiations never stop. Venezuela, a country many people struggle to locate on a map, continues to quietly shape U.S. foreign policy. Why? To understand the answer, we have to slow down. Because the real reason only reveals itself when history, oil, money, and power are connected step by step, and when you see a global pattern repeating in plain sight. Welcome to its financial history too. Long before Hugo Chávez or Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela mattered for one reason above all others: oil. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, larger than Saudi Arabia's. For most of the 20th century, this made it one of Washington's most valuable partners in Latin America. Venezuelan oil flowed north, US dollars flowed south. Stability, at least on the surface, seemed guaranteed. But beneath that relationship was a fragile foundation. Venezuela was rich, but dangerously undiversified. Oil didn't just dominate the economy. It dominated politics, government budgets, and national identity. When oil prices were high, Venezuela looked unstoppable. When prices fell, everything depended on how strong its institutions really were. That weakness mattered more than anyone realized at the time. In the 1970s, Venezuela nationalized its oil industry and created PDVSA, the state oil company. Initially, this looked like a success. Oil prices were rising. Government revenue surged, and Venezuela positioned itself as a proud, independent energy power. But nationalization also centralized control. Oil money became political power, and political power became personal power. This set the conditions for what came next. By the late 1990s, frustration with inequality and corruption boiled over. Hugo Chávez rose to power, not just promising reform but promising revenge against the old system. He reframed Venezuela's story as one of exploitation by domestic elites and by the United States. Oil, he argued, should fund social justice, not foreign corporations. At first, the timing favored him. Global oil prices soared in the 2000s. Chávez used oil revenue to fund massive social programs, reduce poverty, and consolidate popular support. Across Latin America, he became a symbol of resistance to U.S. influence. But here's the critical shift that often gets overlooked. Chávez didn't just challenge U.S. policy. He challenged the systems beneath use of power. He openly questioned dollar-based oil trade, built alliances with Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba, and positioned Venezuela as part of a world moving away from U.S. dominance. This is when Venezuela stopped being merely a domestic, political issue and became a strategic one. Then reality intervened. When oil prices crashed in 2014, the consequences of decades of dependence arrived all at once. Venezuela had no meaningful savings, no diversified economy, and an oil industry weakened by mismanagement and politicization. Price controls destroyed production. Corruption drained resources. When revenue collapsed, the system collapsed with it. After Chávez's death, Nicolas Maduro inherited a broken machine. Instead of rebuilding institutions, he tightened control. Instead of reform, he doubled down. The United States responded with escalating sanctions, officially aimed at pressuring political change and defending democratic norms. But sanctions didn't create reform. They locked Venezuela into collapse. Oil production fell further. Hyperinflation destroyed savings. Millions fled the country. At this point, a reasonable question emerges. If Venezuela was already broken, why didn't the U.S. just walk away? Because collapse creates something worse than failure: a vacuum. As Venezuela weakened, other powers moved in. China provided billions in oil-backed loans. Russia gained strategic influence near U.S. territory. Iran helped Venezuela bypass sanctions and revive parts of its refining capacity. What had once been a U.S.-aligned oil state became a foothold for America's rivals. From Washington's perspective, this was the nightmare scenario. A failed state with enormous energy reserves sitting in the Western Hemisphere aligned with adversarial powers. Walking away would mean surrendering influence permanently. Staying involved meant managing a disaster without controlling it. That is why every solution since then has failed. Sanctions hardened alliances instead of breaking them. Diplomatic isolation pushed Venezuela closer to rivals. Political pressure weakened institutions without replacing them. Each strategy treated Venezuela as a political problem, when it was also an energy problem, a financial problem, and a systems problem. And this is where the story stops being just about Venezuela. You've seen this pattern before. Countries rich in strategic resources that try to operate outside U-dominated systems often face the same arc: economic leverage, political pressure, sanctions, realignment toward rival powers. Iraq, Iran, Libya, Russia, different contexts, same structural tension. Today, as global energy markets tighten and supply chains fracture, Venezuelan oil suddenly looks less disposable. That's why sanctions quietly loosen. That's why negotiations reopen. That's why the U.S. keeps returning to the table. Not because Venezuela is strong, but because it's too important to ignore. The real reason the U.S. can't let Venezuela go isn't ideology. It's fear. Fear of losing influence. Fear of rivals filling the vacuum. Fear that the systems holding global power together are more fragile than we admit. Venezuela is a warning about what happens when resource wealth replaces institutional strength. It's proof that foreign policy is shaped as much by energy and leverage as by values. And it shows that once a country becomes strategically embedded in global systems, letting it fail is never simple. The question now isn't just what happens to Venezuela next. The real question is how many other countries are quietly moving toward the same breaking point and whether the world is prepared for the consequences when they do. If you want more deep cause and effect stories like this, stories that connect history, money, and power beyond the headlines, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who wants to understand how the world really works. Because understanding these patterns isn't optional anymore. It's survival.